Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Laugesen, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger, China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars, in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Please subscribe to our Substack at Present Danger China and follow us on X at CPD China. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is the president for the Institute for the American Future, vice chair of the Committee on the Present Danger China, and host of Securing America on Real America's Voice Network.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of our weekly series of Committee on the Present Danger China webinars. This is an extraordinarily important one, to my way of thinking. We have used all of them, really, to try to, explain, illuminate, dissect, and otherwise help people come to grips with the reality of what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing to our country for decades. Notably, in the course of something they call unrestricted warfare against this nation, using essentially every imaginable technique for weakening our country and undermining both our economy and our national security, often to the very considerable detriment of the people of the United States, as well as, of course, our constitutional republic. In the course of these many programs where we've tried to illuminate as many of those lines of attack, we've also discussed the People's War that our friend Gordon Chang, with whom we're going to be speaking momentarily, has acquainted us, something that was helpfully pushed out, not in some secret document that we happened upon, but on the pages of the preeminent propaganda instrument of the Chinese Communist Party, namely People's Daily, in English, no less, in which they described the whole of society, People's War, that dictator Xi Jinping had declared on America. This, like the unrestricted warfare, documented notably in a book by that name back in 1999 by two People's Liberation Army colonels, are what I'm fond of describing, using intelligence parlance, as clues. Clues as to the fact that we are indeed in a war with China. And whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we try to ignore it or not, that war is proceeding apace and may well now be at the cusp of a new phase, a vastly more dangerous one, namely a shooting war. Incredibly, the United States government has largely failed to even acknowledge these various attacks upon our country by the Chinese Communist Party, let alone respond to them until now. And when I mean now, I mean literally a week ago today, President Donald J. Trump issued, I believe, the first of his national security presidential memoranda. This one entitled America First Investment Policy, whereby he laid out in terms, extraordinarily familiar to those who have been watching these programs, and certainly people who are familiar more broadly with the work of our Committee on the Present Danger China, and especially our great friend and leader on so many of these issues, Roger Robinson, from whom we will also be hearing momentarily. The text of the memorandum is on the whitehouse.gov website. I strongly commend it to all of you as a resource that I think, especially if you feel as we do, that we must be fighting back, preferably in the nonviolent sense of the word, but certainly in the meaning of the word that describes effective action against this mortal enemy. And that, we believe, is first and foremost to stop underwriting this foreign adversary, as the president calls them. We believe enemy serves even better. We're going to talk with people who are very important players in this particular battle space. And it's a great, great honor to be able to both introduce them to you and to interact with them on this particular occasion, where we take stock of what the president has done, what must come next to implement his broad direction, his statement of intent, if you will, and what is likely to be the Chinese response and the net effect of all of it. To begin with, we're going to hear part of an interview that I conducted yesterday with one of our duty experts and regulars on these webinars, a very prominent member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, indeed one of the most, I think, consequential naval intelligence officers, certainly of our time. That would be Captain James Fennell, United States Navy, retired. In the course of his distinguished career in the Navy, he was extraordinarily insightful, prescient, and I think influential in raising the alarm about what the Chinese were doing, the Chinese communists were doing, specifically with their military, the People's Liberation Army, its Navy, its Air Force, its missile forces, and so on. And in the course of my conversation, I just asked him to kind of level set with us from the perspective of a man deeply knowledgeable about the Chinese threat, particularly in that shooting war context, what the implications are for the national security of the United States, especially of this Chinese receiving essentially free money from American investors thanks to captured elites on Wall Street. We're going to hear a portion of this longer interview. I encourage you all to take it aboard at securingamerica.substack.com. We also want to acknowledge a book by Captain Fennell and Dr. Bradley Thayer, to which reference is made in the course of the interview, I believe. It's called Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. Let's go to the videotape with Captain Fennell at this point.
On Friday of last week, Donald Trump issued what he called a national security presidential memorandum, unveiling a new, quote, America First investment policy, unquote. And in it, he basically said what our Committee on the Present Danger of China has been saying from its inception, and you've been with us from the get-go on all that, and that is we have to stop underwriting this mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party, including by putting American investors' money directly in companies that support the weapons buildup that you've just decried of the Chinese Communist Party's People's Liberation Army. The president sort of talked about how he really wanted to have Chinese investment in the United States, but it talked about constraining even that, let alone our investment in China. How important is it that when you talk about embracing communist China, we stop embracing it with Wall Street's, sluicing of our investment dollars, our pension funds, our 401k plans, and what have you, into PLA, as well as human rights abusing and, for that matter, other military civil fusion companies of China?
It's absolutely the most important thing that we can do immediately, because we can't build ships, we can't build aircraft carriers in one day, but we can in one day stop funding the PRC's aggression around the world and towards us. And so this America First memorandum that came out last week is phenomenally important, and it attacks the CFIUS, this Committee for Foreign Investment in the U.S. Process that's been around since I was in the uniform. When I was an ensign, I remember looking at CFIUS packages, and will now make a much harder for the Chinese to be able to buy in America, which will dramatically alter their ability to get foreign funds. It was announced today in Chinese press that for the first, hasn't happened since the Lehman Brothers crisis in 2008, but China's investing $55 billion into several of their key top banks. We don't know why they're doing this right now. I've reached out to some economists that I know, and they've never seen this only once or twice before. And what the Chinese said they're going to do to help fill that is to create a special treasury fund. So I want to know if this America First Amendment or memorandum will prohibit U.S. firms from buying special PRC treasury bonds, which would help them fill their coffers. So these are very important issues, and choking off the money to the PRC's machine will have a huge impact and may see them change their behavior. That's the hope. That's the deterrent effect that we want. We don't want war, we don't want conflict, but we cannot keep feeding them. So this is a great maneuver. And again, it gets back to this, the headlines from the media cherry picks one statement about Taiwan and doesn't even mention the fact of what he did on Friday. And I have, liberal colleagues that I've talked to, and they said, by no way, shape, or form is this a gift to the PRC, as many leftist China hands are saying, is that Trump is providing gifts to Xi. This is not a gift. This is a real confrontation. And you also saw reporting this week that said we're considering charging $1 million a port call for every Chinese ship that pulls into our ports to offload material. Now, I don't know where that's at actually, but that kind of thinking and that kind of proactive approach to say, hey, we're no more free rides. You're going to pay, and we're not going to give you money.
I would go so far as to say what Donald Trump has done is launch a financial warfare front against the Chinese Communist Party, and my prayerful hope is it'll not only affect their behavior, but it might actually help the Chinese people liberate themselves from this odious regime. Please God.
Well, there you have a little editorial comment from me, but very important insights from Captain Fennell. We're going to turn next to another of our great contributors to these programs, a man who has not only been at the forefront on the civilian side, really, of awakening our people and our government and others to the dangers the Chinese Communist Party poses, but who has been, I think, an incredibly prominent and important contributor to the debate about this particular practice, namely of putting Wall Street's captured elite, if you will, in the position to underwrite what both the military, clearly military, and the military civil fusion companies are doing to endanger us, to oppress the people of China, and otherwise create conditions that make this a much more dangerous world for everything we hold dear. His name is Gordon G. Chang. You have doubtless seen him on any number of other media platforms. I trust you've followed his writings at the Gatestone Institute and Newsweek, among other places. His most recent book is Plan Red, China's Project for Destroying America. He has been a featured contributor to Maria Bartiromo's two specials, she calls them seasons, of a program, a special program at Fox Nation entitled Underwriting the Enemy. You may also have caught him if you were watching the president's appearance at the Conservative Political Action Conference on last Saturday, When he detected that Gordon Chang was in the audience, he stopped everything and he called out to him, thanked him, and said, "How am I doing on China?" So we're going to find out specifically what Gordon makes of this memorandum and more broadly, the corrective that it represents to what I think of as strategic insanity of allowing China's captured elite to effect this kind of penetration, not just of Wall Street, by the way, but also the US government. Gordon, it's great to have you with us, sir. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Frank. As we heard from both Didi and you, China has been assaulting the United States. There's the People's War and unrestricted warfare. But fortunately now, we are fighting back. So let's get started. And we start on the 21st of this month when we just heard President Trump issued his America First investment policy. Now, this document doesn't make any immediate changes, but it does something more important. It signals the direction of Trump policy. And for this, we need a little context. Now, Trump started out a little wobbly. We saw this, for instance, when on his first day in office, he instructed the Attorney General of the United States not to enforce the TikTok law. Also, in late December, during the transition period, members of the Trump team, and perhaps that was Elon Musk, as some have reported, but the Trump team basically got Congress to axe an investment review proposal, which would not have only subjected large American investments into China to scrutiny, but also would have restricted some of them. But that's not all. In December, we heard President Trump trying to invite Xi Jinping to the inauguration, which would have been unprecedented. Also, there was rumors that Trump actually wanted to go to Beijing in his first 100 days to try to achieve some sort of grand bargain with the Chinese. And one other thing, it was not in America's interest, as Trump tried to do, to start nuclear weapons talks with both the Chinese and with the Russians. But that has changed. And that changed with the issuance of this memorandum, because we can see that the Trump administration is now going in a very different direction. It's no longer soft on China, as critics claim. It is actually going very hard. So in this February 21 memorandum, which Roger Robinson and others will talk about, matter of fact, it actually channels Roger Robinson because he's been talking about this for years. And he's gotten the American public and the American government to move in a much better direction. If you look at this memorandum, it does maybe four principal things. One of them, it directs the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which Jim Fennell just talked about. It directs CFIUS to impose much greater scrutiny on investments from what are called foreign adversaries, particularly China. It directs CFIUS to go easy on investments from allied and friendly countries as long as they're not partnering with foreign adversaries. And obviously, this is an attempt to get these countries not to work with China. It directs the Treasury to do a number of different things. And one of them is to start looking very closely at American tech transfers, especially in particular areas, which are biotechnology, hypersonics, aerospace, advanced manufacturing, and directed energy. And the last thing that it does is it directs Treasury to look at outbound portfolio investments, something that Roger has been talking about for quite some time. So here we have the makings of an important policy and a very important change in America's direction. And not just direction, a change in direction in what Trump is doing, but also a change over the course of American policy, where we had, especially after the Cold War, this notion of engaging the Chinese, what Jim Fennell and Brad Thayer talked about as our greatest strategic mistake. So in recent weeks, we have seen the Trump administration not only issue the America First investment policy memorandum, but we've seen other things as well. So for instance, on February 1st, President Trump imposed a 10% across-the-board tariff on Chinese goods because of fentanyl. This week, President Trump added another 10%, and the second 10% will go into effect March 4th. President Trump imposed steel tariffs on steel and aluminum. This will especially hit Chinese producers. As we just heard, they're going to be, President Trump directed the U.S. Trade Representative to impose these $1 million plus charges on Chinese-owned ships and Chinese-built ships that enter America's port. And in something which has escaped a lot of attention, but which is as important as what we've just heard, President Trump eliminated the $800 de minimis tariff exemption for goods from China, which online retailers like Temu and others have been taking advantage of. Now, that rule change has been deferred because of the need to put in place enforcement mechanisms, but it's coming nonetheless. You put all of this together, and it's clear that the administration has taken a view on China. And that view is this, that economic security is national security, and that China is a direct national security threat. So right now, we are moving in the right direction. But there are also other things that have occurred recently. So, for instance, President Trump's comments on Greenland, they were directed towards Chinese attempts to get mining concessions and to build infrastructure projects on the world's biggest island. And then, of course, there is Panama. Because of pressure from President Trump, we are seeing all sorts of things move in the right direction. So, for instance, President Molino said that Panama would not be renewing its 2017 memorandum for Belt and Road projects with China. And President Molino actually said he might even cancel the existing memorandum. More significantly, the Panamanian government is now going to court to declare the franchises of Hutchison, the global port operator. Hutchison has two crucial port operations in the canal zone at both ends, at Cristobal on the Atlantic side and at Balboa on the Pacific side. These could easily be turned into military facilities, as we have heard from U.S. Southern Command. The Panamanian government is going into court to try to overturn the 2021 25-year extension of these port franchises. And that's, of course, a very good thing. But we're seeing a couple of other things that President Trump is doing. One of them is energy. President Trump believes that the more that we drill, the more that we frack, the more energy that we produce, we will not only become energy independent, which we have been for quite some time, but we will also be able to use energy for geopolitical purposes around the world. That will lower the cost of energy. Now, China, in one sense, would like this because it is a net energy importer, but on balance, it doesn't like it. And it doesn't like it because China is conducting proxy wars on 3 continents, in Europe and Ukraine, in Africa along its northern edge, and of course in the Middle East through Iran. And both of China's proxies, Russia and Iran, are energy exporters. And President Trump's moves on energy are going to end, I think, the ability of both Moscow and Tehran to attack the world if these sanctions are indeed enforced that the Trump administration is putting in place. But what's going on here is that when Trump takes away China's proxies, it basically defangs Beijing itself, because its main foreign policy initiative these days is to disrupt the world through proxies. The other thing that Trump's doing is he's deglobalizing the world with his tariffs. This is critically important to China because Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, he has made it clear that he's turning his back on consumption as the basis for the Chinese economy. And that means China has only one way to rescue a grim situation at home, and that's to export more. But as President Trump puts more and more tariffs around goods coming into the United States, we are seeing other countries do the same thing. This is deglobalization. This is going to hit China critically. Now, many people say that Trump is no Ronald Reagan, and that's true. Ronald Reagan believed that he had to take down the evil empire, the Soviet Union. Trump doesn't believe that about the Communist Party of China. But what Trump is doing with all of his moves is he's having the effect of taking down the Communist Party. And so right now we're seeing, not only with this February 21 investment policy memorandum, we are seeing across the board a new Trump attitude towards China. And I think the changes are going to be historic.
I concur completely with that presentation. I'm so glad we have it as a sort of a starting point for more detailed conversation on what's in this memorandum and what is likely to flow from it. For that, we're going to hear first from the man who has now been cited by, I think, by me and Gordon, and will be, I know, the subject of further commentary by our other contributors as well, because he really, I think, invented this entire portfolio of financial warfare for the United States against the Chinese Communist Party. He's Roger Robinson. His earlier claim to fame, prior to this memorandum, was he was instrumental in helping as the Senior Director for International Economic Affairs at the Reagan National Security Council. That president, the existential threat to freedom of the Soviet Union. He has been laboring in a number of capacities as, among other things, the chairman and the ranking member of the U.S. Economic and Security Review Commission, congressionally chartered organization, focused on China. He has also been very active with the Coalition for Prosperous America, the Committee on the Present Danger China, and other entities in illuminating what has been going on in this particular space. I think it's fair to say that we almost certainly would not have seen the body of work that Maria Bartiromo has presented so effectively had it not been for Roger's work in this space. And we're particularly grateful that as he has been advancing our understanding of what the Chinese are up to, what the national security as well as economic implications of it have been, are, and would likely continue to be. He has been offering specific ideas and initiatives for corrective action. And I think this, as we've now heard from several of us, this memorandum very, very strongly tracks with those recommendations. So we're anxious to get Roger's thoughts on all of this, and particularly what needs to be done now. Roger, welcome back, sir. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Frank, for those generous remarks. I can tell you this is far from an individual effort. Gordon, the Committee on the Present Danger China, as was mentioned, the Coalition for Prosperous America, my colleague who you'll be hearing from, Justin Bernier, and a host of others have been putting shoulder to the wheel for years now, seeking to advance this financial intelligence and financial, frankly, warfare capability. We're really countering China's warfare against us. We are in a defensive mode, but we have certain advantages in the financial domain, among them having roughly 2/3 of the world's investable capital in the United States, capital markets that are roughly equivalent to the rest of the size of the rest of the world's combined, and the world's reserve currency, all ours. Our principal adversaries, China and Russia, for example, don't have convertible currencies. So we are in a very lopsided situation, yet we've never really leveraged our dominance over the global financial domain, nor have we been forced to weaponize it or channel it in the kind of directions that we're being forced to do now. Unfortunately, over the past 25 years, we've seen a veritable flood of Chinese companies coming to our capital markets. These have now number as many as 5,000 Chinese companies traded on our exchanges. And there was no screening. There was no diligence. There was no oversight, especially of a national security and human rights minded variety. And as a consequence, when you don't look at the nature of the companies coming to your markets, you end up in the dire situation we find ourselves in today, whereby all manner of corporate bad actors have found a home in the portfolios of some 75 million of us or more American retail investors through investment products, particularly index funds like exchange traded funds that have been marketed to the American people, who they've been put into largely unknowingly by large asset managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and others. And we've also been mistreated by index providers like MSCI, FTSE Russell, even Dow S&P, who never really cared what kind of Chinese companies were in their indexes from which investment products are essentially benchmarked and made. So what does it mean? Well, it means that when we talk about all manner of bad actors, how do you think the American people feel about having their hard-earned retirement and investment dollars invested in companies, Chinese companies that are, again, traded on our exchanges, if not listed here, who have been in the business of aiding and abetting genocide in Xinjiang, equipping concentration camps, trafficking in slave labor, building a surveillance state. Now, that's just a sample on the human rights side. Let's transit over to the national security side. Hypersonic glide vehicles, the last two aircraft carriers, sixth-generation fighter aircraft, upgrading of ICBMs targeting American families, building that massive Navy that now substantially exceeds our own. Who is picking up that tab? Well, to a large extent, it's you and me and the folks in this watching this broadcast and scores of millions of others of us. So that's the frankly sickening reality that we've lived with over this 25-year period. And you'd wonder, well, wait a minute, who's in charge? What about U.S. government regulators? Where's Treasury? Where is the Securities and Exchange Commission? Where's been the National Economic Council? Well, sadly, in the past, they've been missing in action. As you can imagine, there's a revolving door problem here, whereby the people that are at the top of some of these organizations and departments are senior Wall Street executives. And that puts them in a somewhat conflicted environment, as would put it generously, whereby they may be more interested in nest feathering upon their return to their executive positions on Wall Street than they are about protecting the national security, the fundamental values, and investors in this country, retail and institutional as well, investor protection. These are black box Chinese companies. They don't meet any of the criteria for trading in markets like those of the United States. There's no minority shareholders' rights. There's no legal recourse. There's no disclosure of material risks. There's very little, if any, corporate governance. And the list goes on. They're not even consistent with following U.S. federal securities laws. And the only country in the world, I might add, that fits into that category. They have received preferential treatment at every step of the way. So when we talk about context, and Gordon usefully provided some of that context, but I hope this has helped in that regard, because we need to see the stark contrast with the Trump administration, who has taken this bold stroke, this history-making document. And I don't say that because, it's associated with the ideas that I've long expounded. That's not it. It is history by any measure. And it is so immensely important and refreshing to see the president take this stand in such a clear-cut way, in which he's instructing the executive branch agencies of this government to provide the kind of action items the implementation of these directives, in effect, instructions, certainly, to the T. And we're going to have to hold feet to the fire here. Let me read one sentence from the document. The United States will establish new rules to stop United States companies and investors from investing in industries that advance the PRC's national military civil fusion strategy. Well, let me tell you, that's the bulk of Chinese companies right there. And I don't see any equivocation there. I don't see any room for interpretation there. And I'm hopeful that under this administration, Scott Bessent, Paul Atkins over there at the SEC, elsewhere, are not going to have clientitis of the type that we have, frankly, were burdened by in the past, and help stunt these developments from taking place, frankly, much sooner. Wall Street is a powerful lobbying event. They've gone to the committees on jurisdiction in the House and Senate, particularly House Financial Services, where they've run the table in blocking all forms of legislation that would have even been low-hanging fruit, like stopping blacklisted, sanctioned American companies who we shouldn't be doing business with, and indeed are prohibited from selling equipment and technology to. And yet, as Frank has put it in the past, it's okay to keep them in business. We can fund them. We can't do business with them, mind you, but we can have the American people keep them a going concern. That kind of inconsistency couldn't be more glaring. And I know my time is very short, but I would just say that our task now is to take the president's checklist that's embodied, if not in specific details in every case, certainly in the framework and overview, to get to the very investment venues that are at the root of this disaster. A-shares, those Chinese companies that are only listed on domestic Chinese exchanges and that are littering the index funds of the American people. How many? 4,000 of the 5,000 roughly estimated Chinese companies in our markets are these unregulated, unseen A-shares that are rife with bad actors. What about the blacklisted companies themselves? Why isn't a no-brainer that they're out of the capital markets instantly when you're on a blacklist of the United States, any one of them, and it should be illegal to hold the securities, read stocks and bonds of those companies and those of their subsidiaries? And what about the variable investment entities? We don't have time to go through all of the machinations here, including joint ventures between our major banks and asset managers with China's largest state-owned banks, which is a direct feed into the CCP and the PLA. All of these particulars have to be brought to a screeching halt. And I'm confident that the Committee on the Present Danger and the Coalition for a Prosperous America and others are going to be keeping feet to the fire, not to mention our heroine, our standard bearer, Maria Bartiromo, and her Underwriting the Enemy series, which has proven so powerful and illuminating, the last airing of which was 2.5 short weeks before the appearance of the America First investment policy. No coincidence, I would suggest. So it is with a gladdened heart and with great optimism for the Trump administration that I greet this historic development. And again, thanks for all of those folks, many of whom are involved in this call, if you will, or broadcast, for all they've done to be supportive. Thanks.
Thank you, Roger. And let me just reinforce your point about the team effort here. It's been an amazing group that has come together, but it takes nothing away from that point to say how important your leadership has been. So we're very grateful for that as well. Justin Bernier, as advertised, is next up. Justin is a man that has deeply studied these matters, but also been in the belly of the beast at Morgan Stanley. He was involved with private equity wealth management. He has also served on the staff of the House Armed Services Committee. These days, he is the proprietor of a national security index and the driving force behind a national security exchange traded fund in the emerging market space on NASDAQ. And we wanted to get his take on both what the president has done to date, what, again, are the sorts of things, Roger's given us some ideas on this, but we'd like yours as well, Justin, as to what the president may want to do to enrich this tasking to the government, the executive branch government, more broadly, as well as the kinds of things we're going to need to be looking out for in terms of implementation, so as to not let the full weight of this initiative to somehow be withheld from making the kind of difference that I believe we all think it can in the war the Chinese Communist Party has waged against our country. So, Justin, we're delighted to have you with us. Over to you, sir.
Frank, thanks for having me. And, this memorandum was truly an important piece of information that came from the president, the White House, down to the Treasury Department. And it was released late on a Friday night. And I have to wonder, and I assume that it dampened many a cocktail party on Park Avenue the next evening, because the asset managers got a huge wake-up call. This is a sea change in the way Wall Street is going to have to deal with international investing. And so we look at this from a couple different points of view. You have the asset managers writ large who now are faced with a prospect of the government coming in and using more restrictions, all the legal tools that the White House says it has for these type of things to restrict money from going to Chinese military companies. And by the same token, we talk about expanded restrictions that are going to get into lesser known defense companies that are involved in emerging technologies such as cruise missiles and artificial intelligence. Now, why this is important is because Wall Street has adopted essentially a fiduciary business model. They don't make money so much anymore in the old days with like brokerage and commissions on trades. Now they have a legal responsibility effectively to do what's in the best interest of the client and to make sure that they're not investing in things that could lose a lot of money because of Chinese exposure in the wrong places. So that's a big thing right there. And that's going to get into some joint venture issues that I'll talk about in a minute. But the other really big development in this memorandum, and I think it's a stroke of genius, is by introducing the ERISA issue. ERISA is important because that's the Employee Retirement Income Security Act in 1974. And what that does is put rules in place for the proper management of retirement accounts. So think corporate pension plans, and you have what are called defined contribution plans. So 401ks and 403bs as are commonly known. Now the managers of those plans are going to have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that their clients are not exposed to the type of companies that are laid out in this memorandum. Now, there are going to be some rules that are going to come down the pike, I'm sure, and there'll be executive orders, but it puts them on notice that you're not going to be able to take the fiduciary standard that if it's legal, we can do it. Now, a lot of the states out there, I think, are going to be the first ones to really take a hard look at this because every state has employees that are in 403bs. And now they have to start deciding, are we going to take a chance that our employees are going to be invested in these type of bad actor companies? We spoke with one mid-sized state on Monday that just by following BlackRock's international index has over 120 companies that we would consider bad actors. So these are Chinese military companies, companies that have been sanctioned for human rights violations by the US, and companies that are working on some of the most profound emerging technologies in the PLA value chain. So they're going to have to take a look back and say, look, we don't want to send over $100 million into these bad actor companies. Let's think about different ways to do it. So those are two really big things there. It's the asset managers on Wall Street that have a fiduciary responsibility. They're going to have to re-look at their business model. And then we have the states and we have the other ERISA type accounts that have to worry about employees getting the short shrift in the event of Chinese companies being thrown out of capital markets. Now, one thing, as good as this memorandum was, the one thing that I thought was missing was the issue of joint ventures. The joint ventures that Roger mentioned, where you have companies like BlackRock and Goldman Sachs that are partnered up with the largest banks in China, in fact, the largest banks in the world, to sell investment products on the mainland through those large banks, because most investment products in China are sold through these bank channels. This is a big danger, not only because we're funding through those capital flows Chinese military companies that are in the PLA value chain, but also because those banks right now that are run by the Chinese Communist Party, those are Chinese government entities throughout, they are now partnered with the most powerful Wall Street asset managers, such as BlackRock in the United States, that have unfettered access to policymakers in Washington. This creates a conflict of interest. And so I would urge the administration, I think this is a great start. You've outlined the problem perfectly. I think there are all sorts of areas along the waterfront that you've hit, but the one place where I think it can be stronger is about talking about these joint ventures between Wall Street firms and the Chinese controlled banks.
Justin, thank you. That's extremely helpful, and we'll be discussing all this, I think, a bit further in the Q&A here in a moment. But before we do, we have one final presentation from men I'm very pleased to introduce, I think, to this audience for the first time. I'm sure it will not be the last. His name is O.J. Oleka. He is the former Deputy State Treasurer of Kentucky and currently the CEO of a very important organization, the State Financial Officers Foundation. And we wanted to have OJ join us to talk a little bit about the work that the SFOF, as it's known by its acronym, has been doing at the state level, principally, of course, with financial officers, notably treasurers, to encourage them, quite apart from what the federal government might or might not be doing, to get their portfolios, their public pension funds, notably, and other investment vehicles. Their, I think, state academic institutions, endowments, and the like, out of communist China as well. We're very pleased to have OJ with us. Thank you for finding a few minutes for us. OJ, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Frank. I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with my fellow panelists. And I first want to thank all the patriots who are participating in this conversation. It is incredibly important that you all have the tools and the resources to share with the people that you know about how big and how important this fight is. All of my colleagues have said it. Let me put it to you like this. We are in a fight for Western civilization. It is no secret the Chinese Communist Party will tell you themselves that they seek to replace the United States as the hegemonic force around the world. They want to gain entry and control in their hemisphere, and they want to expand it to the entire globe because they see that as a way to continue what they believe to be their dominant position on issues. This is a fight for freedom. It is a fight for liberty. It's a fight for opportunity. So the simple question is, do you want to have a free nation and a free globe, or do you want to have an oppressed and controlled one? If you want that, then you can side with the Chinese Communist Party. But if you want to be free, if you want to have a globe that is free, then you need an America First policy, which I'm very thankful that this president is pursuing, as we've heard from our colleagues, but also that our states are pursuing, because it is incredibly important, again, as it was outlined, that states lead the way on this. And thankfully, with our organization at the State Financial Officers Foundation, that's what you've seen. And again, to break it down for those of you who are new to the organization itself, our total responsibility is to promote fiscally sound public policy with key stakeholders like Frank and the folks you've just heard, to educate the American people, that's you, on the importance of financial management in a free market economy, and pushing back and divesting from China is priority number one. And for us, we do it in a number of different ways. Roger already outlined why it is incredibly important to divest from a financial market perspective, and we have been waging, our state financial officers, the treasurers, the comptrollers, and so on, we have been waging financial warfare against the Chinese Communist Party for a while. In fact, last summer, you had Treasurer Vivek Malik in Missouri. You had CFO Jimmy Patronis in Florida leading the way, along with Kansas Treasurer Stephen Johnson, to divest pension funds and other funds from China for this very reason. Because if you can starve the beast, then they won't have as many resources to, again, attack us financially, to attack us technologically, and God forbid, militarily. We've also seen in Indiana, State Treasurer Daniel Elliott and Indiana Comptroller Elise Nishala lead the way to make Indiana the first state to totally divest from China. Their state law said they had to do it in 5 years. They got it done in one. And they removed $1 billion of investment from the Chinese Communist Party and the businesses that are attached to it. This is incredibly important that we are leading the way at the state level to fight against this powerful adversary that seeks to do us harm. But it is not only in the financial space, it's also in the technological area as well. Of course, many of you all know, if not all of you, know about DeepSeek, which is, of course, the Chinese AI component that a lot of people are speculating they stole the technology from ChatGPT. The reason why, again, that is so pernicious is because if you download DeepSeek, if you get access to it, then the Chinese have access to you. They're able to see everything that you're doing through your phone. They're able to gather information on you, and if they so chose, to use it, to weaponize it in ways that could be harmful to the American people. We have a treasurer in Pennsylvania, Stacey Garrity, who banned DeepSeek from her office. Nobody in her team can use it. Nobody can download it. And again, the reason why that's important is because if you work in the government and you have access to sensitive information and sensitive material, if the Chinese Communist Party, through their technology strategy, is able to gain information to what you can see, to what you are privy to what you use, then potentially you're, again, colluding without even your own knowledge with the Chinese Communist Party to gain advantage as it relates to the United States. So again, in conclusion, this is something that our states are fighting every single day. There are numerous state treasurers and comptrollers across the country who believe in free markets that are fighting against it. And the State Financial Officers Foundation is excited and privileged to lead the way in providing our folks the information to keep the fight every single day.
Fabulous. OJ, thank you. Super. And we're going to want to get more detail from you on some of this if we can. Roger, though, I did want to ask you, if I can, in this Q&A portion of the program, to talk about something that I don't think anybody mentioned, that is important to understand how we got into this fix. And that is that there was a memorandum of understanding struck back in 2013. Could you tell us how that came about and what it entailed and the contribution it has made to the sort of fix that you've described we are now in, with this unbelievable penetration of our capital markets by the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, yes, Frank, we're talking about May of 2013, to be precise. It was the Obama-Biden administration, just to set the scene. And China came in with the view to the United States that they didn't want or would not accept a U.S. government auditor, in this case, the so-called PCAOB, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, which is a function of the SEC, to conduct audits of their Chinese auditing companies to see if everything's on the up and up, to protect the American investor and the rampant fraud that is often accompanying Chinese offerings in this country. Now, this goes back to the year 2000 and so forth, the Enron, WorldCom frauds, where our auditing firms, the Big Four and so forth, were, for the most part, aiding and abetting the fraudulent activities of Enron and these other firms. And it was at that time that there was legislation passed that I think it was Dodd-Frank that made it illegal not to have a U.S. government auditor auditing the auditors, so to speak. And so the Chinese wouldn't have any part of that. And they asked for an exemption, a memorandum of understanding forged between PCAOB and the Chinese Securities Regulatory Commission. And we acceded to this extraordinary plea because it was politically inconvenient for them, mind you. And we just waived one of the most important sources of investor protection in this country. They're the only country in the world that receives such an exemption, hence the term preferential treatment that I was using earlier and that, Frank, you've been very articulate on. So what that meant was not hundreds of billions of dollars sluicing out to Chinese companies from American, unknowing, by the way, American retail investors, but in the trillions. I mean, we're 12 years down the road here. And so we have to understand the cumulative effect and how debilitating that's been in making China the military juggernaut it is today, the superior navy that it has today, the intensified human rights abuses that we see today. All of that has been funded by a simple MOU that basically never saw the light of day and is so inscrutable and exotic that nobody was even looking for it, which is so typical of the financial elements of government. Nobody wants to, they think it's somebody else's problem over to Treasury or the SEC. Well, clearly that was a mistake in the past. And so that's what I would say, Frank, in terms of the implications of that one MOU alone, but it's compounded by so much more that we've talked about. But a great place to start is to rescind formally that memorandum of understanding and make clear no more free lunch program for China on a preferential basis.
Yeah, amen to that, Raj. It just seems to me, whatever else we do, just getting them back to the same set of requirements in terms of transparency, accountability, the management of these companies and so on, as American companies are obligated to perform. Donald Trump's leitmotif of his memorandum is reciprocity at a minimum, and that would seem to require getting rid of the MOU of 2013. Justin, you mentioned one place that you were particularly concerned needed more attention. Would you say a little bit more about this joint venture business and how it is operating? We have some of the biggest banks in the United States doing a lot of this with the Chinese Communist Party. How does that operate? Is it working out for them or just for the Chinese communists?
Work out for the asset managers. And we think about firms like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, BlackRock. These are not just ordinary firms. They have special relationships with the U.S. government, the way Citibank has in the past and still does. They are at the decision-making table oftentimes in the middle of a crisis, and they are extremely powerful when it comes to lobbying not only Congress, but also the executive branch. These companies have set up, through their offshore subsidiaries, these joint ventures with these Chinese banks. And now what that allows them to do is to reap the profit from selling mutual funds and what they call private pensions. So these are annuities that they're selling through these banks on mainland China, but they don't have to really report on them. There's not a lot of filing requirements because the joint ventures are set up between the CCP-run Chinese banks and the offshore versions, so the foreign subsidiaries of the big U.S. asset managers. What I would suggest to the administration is to force them to disclose what's going on with those joint ventures, and ideally make it so painful that they decide to shut them down, because these type of relationships between Nobody doubts this, that these large Chinese banks are CCP organs, and these really dug in U.S. asset managers and banks that have a direct line into the U.S. government. The merger of those two is frankly a national security threat, and it should be treated as such. So I hope when when Treasury actually goes through all of the proposals that I'm sure they're going to come up with as a result of this memorandum from the White House, that they have a plan to distinctly get to the bottom of these joint ventures, to expose what it is that they're up to, and then eventually to make them illegal, or make it so painful for them to maintain them that they just throw their hands up and walk away, because it truly is a merger, an elite merger that we're seeing in slow motion here.
Thank you, Justin. OJ, you have illuminated, I think, something really important about the state level. We've made the point on this show or these webinars with some regularity that state governors were put on notice back in February of 2020 by the then Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, that the Chinese were operating in their states. They were keeping lists of who were their friends and who were not among the governors. They were working with their legislatures. They were penetrating their administrations. They were running influence operations and so on. Could you talk a little bit about the receptivity that you're finding, not just among treasurers, but among other government officials, what the attitude more generally of these states is to the problem of penetration by United Front Work Department entities or Chinese businesses or even the government itself?
Well, it has certainly changed since 2020. You look to a blue state governor like Governor Hochul. She, in fact, had somebody in her office, I think maybe when she was lieutenant governor, who was a spy for the Chinese Communist Party. So this was somebody who, based on the politics of her state and the blue state that she comes from, could have been sympathetic to these issues. But now, as governor, she's been one of the first governors to ban DeepSeek. So this is clearly a bipartisan issue that people are starting to wake up to. But thankfully, our folks, our treasurers and comptrollers and auditors have been awakened to this the entire time. They were able to see it from the beginning as soon as they gained this information. And I want to touch on a little bit about what Justin was saying. When you look at some of these VIEs, that's variable interest entities, these are some of the offshore types of companies that could have been included in Justin's comments. The reason why this is such a big problem for investors, particularly, again, public pension fund investors like the folks that I get to work with, is that at any point in time, the Chinese Communist Party could just declare these things illegal or just gobble up all the investments. And so then that money, your pension, if it's invested, could be gone overnight. That's the deep problem that exists. And then from a different perspective, what we've been trying to do at the state level is another couple things. One, it's trying to make sure that each of our states have policies where the Chinese Communist Party cannot purchase land in states. Because typically what they've done is they've tried to purchase land around national security sites that would be important, again, military bases or just areas that are important for our national security. And then also with universities, the scholarships and the things where you will send folks who are deeply connected to the Chinese Communist Party. Again, not just regular people from China who want to come to the United States for a better life. I want to be clear to differentiate there. These are folks who could be connected to the Chinese Communist Party, making sure that our universities aren't falling prey to those types of things. So our folks at the state level, again, are pushing back on land purchasing from the Chinese Communist Party, but also making sure our universities are standing strong against it as well. And the last thing I'll say before I conclude in response to this question, this is why fighting back against ESG investing is so important. The Chinese Communist Party does not want people in the United States, companies in the United States and Europe to invest in fossil fuels and carbon. It doesn't benefit them very much. They don't have the natural resources that we've got here. As a colleague of mine was saying yesterday in a similar talk, what they do have is a bunch of desert. So if they can push American companies, the American government, through their relations to say that investing in green energy and solar energy is a good thing, even though this energy is not reliable, you can't scale it, it's too expensive. It benefits them because they have a ton of desert. So again, it's a simple question, quite frankly. Do you want to fund American interests and the American economy through oil, gas, coal, things that are safe, reliable, and are actually in supply and cheap? Or do you want to fund the Chinese Communist Party, who effectively wants to wipe us away as the global leader? It's a simple and easy choice for us at the State Financial Officers Foundation.
Thank you for that. And your clarity is really appreciated, as is that of your members. I did want to just mention that there are two other organizations that I think you guys are working with, all of you, in various ways. State Armor, headed up by Michael Lucci, and State Shield, headed up by Joe Gebbia. These are tremendously important, again, force multipliers for the effort to turn around state policies, especially in the absence of a sensible federal policy. But hopefully we'll be able to maximize the synergy between the federal and state levels going forward. I did have several folks in the audience asking how they can learn more, OJ, about what's happening in their states. Do you have a central publicly available repository of information about where the various states stand, red or blue?
Not publicly available yet, but that is something that we're pulling together. And part of it is, again, our folks are looking to get some things done this legislative session. So we will certainly work on constructing that for folks, because I think it is important. I saw one commenter say that they are in the Republic of Texas, but they've got a child who is in the socialist state of California. Two very different approaches to this really important issue. But I think the American people do need to know. So that is something we can certainly work on pulling together.
And I think that if all else fails, folks, get in touch with your own representative and let them know that you are concerned about this. Roger, could I come back to you and ask, I think you mentioned, and certainly the president does in his memorandum, this term military-civil fusion. This is actually enshrined in Chinese law, as I understand it. What is it? What's meant by it? And what are the implications of it for this particular issue of whether we're going to invest?
Well, Frank, not surprisingly, it institutionalizes what most folks who've been students of this have known for a long time, which is China has a very simple philosophy that commercial relationships of all varieties, including financial, must be subservient to the Chinese military and security apparatuses of that country, period. Article 7 of the National Intelligence Law, for example, means that every company in China has to basically heed the wishes of the Communist Party if they're asked to conduct espionage, if they're asked to engage in strategic or military activities on behalf of the CCP. It's not a choice thing. And just as it's not a choice if you're a Chinese company to have a Chinese communist cell that's embedded in your senior management structure, and increasingly, if you can believe it, a new sort of cell called the People's Armed Forces Departments. That's now a requirement in commercial companies. So when we talk about Chinese benign commercial entities, we have to keep in mind that it's pretty hard to suggest you're not associated with the military if you have something called a People's Armed Forces Department embedded in your management structure. That would be an observation I would make. A little more difficult to sanitize yourself, so to speak, on that basis. So military-civil fusion in writ large is this connective tissue, inextricably entwining the two. It's not to say that they're not more benign Chinese companies than others. Indeed, it's also the case that not all Chinese companies have been pressed into service by the security apparatuses or by the PLA. But I can tell you, they're feeling a collective sigh of relief if they haven't, because as soon as they end up on a Pentagon list or are recognized elsewhere on a blacklist of the United States, whether that sanction has teeth or not, you'll see the stock plummet because of the reputational and brand damage done that firm. So there is a way to differentiate those Chinese companies that are more insidious than others. We do have to recognize that they're all ultimately under CCP control. But I can also tell you that what is a very useful exercise is trying to create a conflicted environment within corporate China of those companies that are recruited for nefarious activities and subject to potential blacklists, and those that aren't, who want to stay that way desperately. They don't want to get that call from the PLA. And that dynamic over time can be very helpful in terms of the sheer estrangement and the sheer willingness of the Chinese people and corporate China to just say no.
Thank you, Roger. Justin, you, of course, have a national security index and a fund using it as a screen to try to differentiate between some of those obviously malevolent characters, Chinese companies, and those that are not so much. You may want to comment on that. I did want to ask you, though, too, if you would. There are myriad lists now being compiled by the United States government. The Treasury's got one, the Commerce Department's got one, the State Department's got one. I think the Defense Department, of course, it does. Should the appearance on any of those lists be essentially the basis upon which such Chinese companies and their subsidiaries should not be allowed to do business on the capital markets, whether they're listed there or they're simply raising funds there? What are your thoughts?
Frank, that's our view, that if you're on one of these government blacklists that involve national security, commerce control lists where a company can't get U.S. advanced technology, but they have no problem getting capital from U.S. investors, we believe those companies should be off limits to U.S. investors, and that's why we take them out of our index, the National Security Index, which gets emerging markets exposure without getting investors in the position of having to give their money to these type of companies. And we use 9 different screens, and one of those screens is a company blacklisted or sanctioned. Most Americans may not know that just because a company is on a DoD list doesn't mean that you can't invest in it. And the way the Chinese have operated in the past, when a company does truly get put on what's called the OFAC list at Treasury, where they are off limits to investors, in most cases, the company will simply drop down a subsidiary, and that company, even though it's a subsidiary of a U.S. sanctioned firm, is allowed to soak up U.S. capital, so they get around it. There's only 39 Chinese companies that are officially publicly traded and off limits to U.S. investors. Most of them have subsidiaries and other affiliates that are used to attract U.S. capital. So this looks like something that I think the administration is going to address. But again, I wouldn't stop there, because there are plenty of companies that are inside the PLA value chain that are not on one of these lists, only because perhaps they're not operating in the United States or they haven't tried to get U.S. technology, but they're just as bad, in some cases worse, because they are at the tip of the spear on emerging technologies that the PLA is developing against the United States.
And that's where I wanted to go. And closing to you, OJ, you mentioned at the tail end, I think, of your remarks that you are working on in Pennsylvania, particularly, but I think across the country, getting at this technology penetration and the extraction of it from our country that the Chinese are engaged in. Do you want to say a bit more about that in closing?
Yeah, I think that it's simple from the perspective of now we've got this memorandum from the president that, again, outlines how this kind of thing is bad. And so what we should do and what state elected officials, and again, Treasurer Garrity in Pennsylvania has led the way on this, ban it from your staff, that you can't have it anywhere in the office. You can't have it on the technology that you use to do government work. Because if you do that, it opens up the door, again, not only for you to be spied on, but in fact, for that same type of technology that you are around to be taken and potentially used and weaponized against you in the future. So we want to do more on that. We want to develop and work with partners on model legislation that they might have, on model policy as well. Because again, it is incredibly important that financial officers are leading the way and continue to do so, so we can root out any kind of China investment, any kind of Chinese communist technology that could harm the American people and our freedom.
We're at the end of our allotted time, and I want to thank each of our terrific contributors. Jim Fennell, Captain, United States Navy, retired. Of course, Gordon Chang, Roger Robinson, Justin Bernier, and O.J. Olek. We're so grateful for your expertise and your efforts. Would the three of you still with us like to just tell people how they can get in touch with you, learn more about what you're doing, and otherwise engage with you? Roger?
The Committee on the Present Danger China has my coordinates. The Coalition for a Prosperous America, their website has a lot of material. If you look at the China Project, I have something to do with that, as does Justin, and we've produced quite a body of work. I also chair the Prague Security Studies Institute, that pssi.cz, that likewise has a lot of material. And I would just say quickly to augment what OJ was saying, that State Armor that came up earlier does have quite a lot to offer in terms of guidance at the state level as well. And I would encourage folks to take a look there as well. So I hope that's helpful.
Good. It is indeed. Justin?
Coalition for Prosperous America is a great place to go for information, reports on some of the asset managers. And our website is nationalsecurityindex.com. So nationalsecurityindex.com.
Terrific. Thank you. And OJ, look, what are your coordinates, sir?
Great. My coordinates to find me, sfof.com. That's where you can learn about who all of our financial officers are and the things that we have been pushing. We put out a letter last November. It was the first letter, I think, since I took over as CEO that we put out against China. So it's an important issue for us. We also fight against ESG, debanking, DEI, and we fight for the financial security of the American people. So again, sfof.com. You can follow me on X at OJ Oleka as well. So thanks again for the opportunity to spend some time with you all today.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir, for your time as well. I just wanted to close in a slightly different way than normal by just reading a very interesting comment by one of our audience members. I won't give their name in respect to their privacy, but I just wanted to share with you a thought that I kind of led with, but I think is an appropriate place to conclude this important conversation. The comment goes reads as this, quote, "How is it that China's leadership can openly declare a people's war on the USA and indeed the West, and we have zero response? What would China do if we declared a people's war on them? I'm sure that their response would be dramatically different," unquote. That's for sure, folks. And I just want to underscore what I alluded to at the outset. Thank God Donald Trump is fighting back. And we could not be more gratified that in so doing, he is taking advantage of the kind of talent and insights and recommendations that our presenters today have been advancing under these various entities, including the one that sponsors this particular program, the Committee on the Present Danger China, but others as well. And we're proud to partner with all of them and look forward to doing so even more intently in the days ahead as the implementation of this financial warfare agenda is fleshed out, the teeth are put into it, and hopefully we see corrective action at long last. A part of Wall Street, for sure, hopefully the Congress as well, making all of this statutory prohibiting the kind of support for the Chinese Communist Party that is now the policy of the U.S. government under President Donald Trump. So I'll close with just a final word of thanks to all of you for being with us, for the conviction I have that everything else is compounded by a kind of spiritual warfare that is being waged as well. The good that we represent, I think, and strive to be better and better, needless to say, versus true evil in the form of the Chinese Communist Party, makes all of this particularly urgent, in my view. And we thank God for his help in making it come out right. God bless you all. Back to you, Dee Dee.
Thank you, Frank. And thanks to all of you for being here today. A video of this webinar will be posted to presentdangerchina.org within a day or so of the conclusion of our program. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. And subscribe to our Substack at Present Danger China. Follow us on X at CPD China for updates. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for being here today, and goodbye.